let's dive in. The goal here is to make this, kind of very actionable takeaways for all of us. And I end up, kind of bringing a few of these things to my team after with some aha moments. So excited to dive in. I think maybe before we get too into the details, maybe just to set the stage, let's talk about kind of how this year is a bit different than pretty much every year, at least that I've been selling in the last decade, and why being more prescriptive and thinking really hard about where the buyer's coming from is particularly important right now. So I guess kind of the guiding question is, from different, kind of levels here, from managers, VPs, rep level, like how has this last, especially 6 months changed the way that you've thought about and approached sales in your team? Maybe we'll go in reverse order here. Rafael, if you want to kick things off.
Yeah, sure. Like for us at SalesPlaybook, like usually we help companies to increase their sales capabilities. So at the moment for us, it's like really trying to make them understand that that's the right moment to invest in sales, even there's a downturn, because now they don't have like all this money to spend in hire, because hiring is also very expensive. So that's actually a good argument that we say, hey, now it's time to invest in the people that are in your company and make them better and close more deals.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a good point, is like, despite it maybe being harder to sell, it's definitely almost more important to be investing in it, because that's where you really need to get better. It's less of, I even think it's less of a product and R&D challenge right now. I think it's more than ever, a sales and marketing challenge. And Manuel, what's your take on that?
You're mute.
You're mute.
Yeah, my take is, I think it's really like this, like Hail Mary, and so like let me send you an offer and then see what happens. This doesn't work anymore in recession, because you need more predictability in your pipeline, because 90% opportunities like zero cash to the bank, and the people that don't embrace that, some other seller will, and it will get commitment from the buyer. And I think that's really like gonna be the key of like make or break of like sales paying salaries, yes or no, because otherwise like a lot of people have like a pipeline, and like some of it will materialize more or less depending on buyer commitment and really understanding what changes in a business. This is especially relevant with longer sales cycle, anything like 3 months and beyond, because the time has changed drastically. So I just got a podcast cancellation for our podcast from a head of sales that I met at SaaS. It was like, great, let's do it. And 24 hours ago, like, well, you read the news on TechCrunch, I need to take care of my people, which is like a news of this week. So can we shift tomorrow to next year? And if I don't have that dialogue, then I would assume everything's fine and I'm going to close like a 5-6 figure deal. And I need that mutual information flow.
Yeah, I think you made a good point at the beginning there, is like, you can't be order takers anymore, which I think a lot of sales teams and people got by with, a pretty decent close rate and being able to get close to goal, if not hit. That's just really not the case anymore, with people having to spend a lot of social capital on some of these decisions, for sure. So Johnston, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think it's, I'm not going to lie, it's been brutal the last 6 months for sure. I mean, it just changed so quickly. And from sort of the middle management perspective, you're trying to answer questions as to why, right, from above and manage up. But at the same time, you're trying to support your team and figuring out and diagnose like where are the challenges, right? I think for us, it's been about going back to the basics, especially around discovery, and trying to shift from being a nice to have to a need to have. For all of you that are familiar with buy now, pay later, it's obviously been a very popular and had a great rise to fame over the past 5 or 6 years. But at some point, you need to start solving pain versus just accelerating revenue. And I think for us, that's the message changing that we're trying to think about. And, as we think about, our own world, it's really about what can we control. And I think that's why this conversation around maps is so relevant. Like, you can control having a map, you can control being a really thoughtful and organized salesperson. You can't control your stock, you can't control people's priorities and other things, but yeah, that's kind of us going back to the basics and trying to manage up for sure, from my perspective.
Yes, yeah. Back to the basics, I think, is a good way of putting what we've seen in the market. I think people got overly complicated with the number of tools and things, and like it's craziness going on in sales and sales tech. And I think where we're seeing people talk about now, it's like, do we have next steps on this deal? Are they the right ones? Are we talking to the right person here? Do we have a business case? Like three really core fundamental things that I think for some reason we got very far from. And even seeing mid-market folks like haven't built that foundational approach to sales. And it's kind of up to us to make sure we get back there if we want to make sure we're making the most of this pipeline. And Keith, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think our challenge is a little bit different. So we sell specifically to staffing recruiting firms, and there are still more jobs out there than candidates for them to fill. And, you know, COVID really accelerated the need for the technology that we offer. And we're working several deals, right? And people expect to have a smooth process journey, setting the expectations. And what we're trying to really solve, and why we use mutual action plans, and we have for many years, what we're seeing is now we've got to take the mutual action plans that we use with our buyers and really leverage it with our internal teams, our SI teams, our CS teams, which we made a huge investment in. We took hybrid reps and split them between hunters and farmers. So now you have a hunter go close a deal, pass it to the AM. They're like, I don't know what you sold. I don't know why you sold it, who the key players are. So that's a gap that we're working to fix and solve. That's, you know, top of mind for me and my team.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's an aspect that also I don't think is discussed enough, is like, hey, a lot of these, especially upper mid-market enterprise deals, it's team selling. And it sucks being on the other side of it when you have a conversation, you invest in a relationship and, you know, your time, money, etc. And then other folks on their team, you're like, how do you not know what's going on? Like, it feels very disrespectful. And obviously that's not the intent. They're not sitting there being like, screw this other team, but that lack of internal collaboration really kind of shows. And this is a great way of having that source of truth, not just for the buyer, but also for your entire team, co-selling with, you know, more technical folks or passing off to onboarding success. So we'll dive in. So yeah, first poll that jumped up here. Are you using mutual action plans in your deals? And maybe we'll quickly define what a mutual action plan is if you're unfamiliar, and we can talk about kind of, you know, a bit more about how they can be a helpful tool to make the most of every opportunity during some of these more challenging times to sell into. We are definitely using mutual action plans.
I'd hope so, Ross.
Yeah. Well, I could define it, but I'd be curious. Maybe Johnston. Yeah, how would you define a mutual action plan? The basics of maybe what's entailed in it, kind of the features, as well as like why. You know, maybe we can hear from everyone as like a bullet after you kind of define the features of like why is it important? Like what's the kind of key piece a lot of people talk about? Is it, you know, a qualifying tool? Is it accelerating, you know, the business case, all that kind of stuff? But maybe we'll start with the what is the thing?
I sort of look at it through the lens of a project manager, right? Like our jobs in sales are, especially the more complex, larger deal sizes, you're managing a project from beginning to end, right? And you have to track that project. You have to hold people accountable. You have to set deadlines, all of that, right? And so a map is a sales version where there's true alignment, as well as a basic format of being able to track what you've done and what needs to done to get to the end goal of not signing, but launching whatever it is, right? Like signing is a stage, but it's about reaching that launch goal. So it can be a document, it can be just a little graph that you're using. There's many different formats, but map at its heart is designed to be an alignment tool as well as an accountability tool that has buy-in. It needs buy-in from both sides.
Totally. Yeah, I think you hit on kind of a few dimensions there. One, the project management. What are we doing and when are we doing by and who owns it? Kind of a key piece, and making sure it's not a closed plan, which means it's not about the signature, but it's also not just about the sales process. It's about getting to that success metric of the customer. So I think that kind of why piece, or like what we're trying to get to, I think is honestly the most commonly missed part of a map. And should honestly be the first thing you start with and the last thing you end with when you're talking about the project, right? Hey, why are we doing this? It's not just about the what and how we're getting there. Why are we doing this? Okay, this is the stuff. And then again, we're doing this because so and so and so. So that's anything anyone else on the panel would add to that?
I think I was going to say, I think he summed it up like perfectly. I always tell the team, it's like, if you want to simplify it to 3 areas, it's qualification, expectations, and accountability, right? And, you know, Johnson did a really good job of summarizing how we also think about it internally at Bullhorn.
For sure. And then in terms of the ROI side of things, okay, this might be, okay, it looks like we got a pretty even split in terms of yes, no, and some folks are and some aren't. What's kind of the why behind it? Like, hey, there's a million things that you can, as a sales leader or rep, be doing to improve your game, right? You could be doing more research on accounts. You could be, you know, spending time in person with, like, there's just a million different things you can be doing. Rolling out a new framework like Challenger or something. What's the why behind using maps as one of those key priorities and the things that you go back to on your team? Manuel, I'm curious to hear your take on that, because I know it's something that you guys have invested in a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people think, okay, I just go with the flow and I will only introduce a mutual action plan once I see decreasing information flow and like something's not working, right? So this is like the healthcare versus sick care thing. I go to the doctor once, like I totally messed up my back, and then I care about like stretching and like physiotherapy, whatever. I think the much smarter way to do it is like prevention, that you introduce like a mutual action plan in your very first call. And so this question always comes up. So like, okay, so just send me some information and then we'll see, I'll evaluate it internally. And if it's interesting, I'll get back to you, which is never typically. And rather go like, hey, look, here's what's going to happen. Like after this first call, are you still interested in like exploring if we can help you get a 10x ROI here? Like if yes, here's the next steps that we're going to go through. This is the next activities I'm going to provide you access to like our knowledge hub. Let's define a group coaching call, which you join in our case, and let me know like which reference customer you would like to talk to, or like which case is most interesting, A or B. We're then going to sit down on a collaboration definition call where we dive deeper on what is the right option. After that, you can take it back to your board and investors, and then we have a decision call for a mid 5-figure amount. And so both sides know exactly what to expect. And I think that's not only a sales thing, that's also the same for talent, that we got good feedback even from candidates that we declined. It's like, at least I knew from the very first call what I was up for. And at every point in time, I knew where we're coming from, where we are, what is the goal of this, and it was a wise use of my time at all times. So long answer to short question, short answer is like any very first call as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Ross, I'll add to that.
Yeah.
One of the hardest pieces of feedback I got early on in my career was I was told by a manager that I serve more than I sell. And I think at the time he meant that I give more than I get. So it was a great piece of feedback and it helped sort of educate my enterprise selling ability. But as I think about it today, a map is a hospitable way to run a sales cycle, right? So we should be serving to some degree. We should be taking care of and trying to make the process as transparent and as easy as possible. And look, it's not on the buyer's job to be organized all the time, right? That's sort of on us. And so a map gives you that tool to help them stay organized, to remind them what their next step is, and to give them something to give internally that makes, you know, my job as a champion for you here at Accord and Affirm a lot easier to get consensus.
Yeah. Maybe just to complete what Johnson said, I think it's also a great tool to disqualify prospects, because I have the feeling, okay, now, as Manuel said, normally we have the policy to create an accord or mutual action plan of the end of the discovery call. And then like we talk, hey, here I will tag you a task that you will join our group coach. Here you have like the case studies that you can take a look. And normally I ask the post-mortem question. They say, hey, I actually need the buy-in from my co-founder. So at the time you already can create a task there and say, get the buy-in with the co-founder, and then tag him there. He gets email notification. And then if I have my decision call and I see, okay, that guy didn't tag any of the tasks, so most likely is not really interested. And I don't know if it's worth to spend another hour with him.
Totally. And I think learned this probably too late in my career is like, I'm an optimist. So I have a great conversation with someone who has the problems that we help solve, all this stuff. Okay, I'm stoked. Doesn't really matter. Okay, they're not super responsive on email. They're not this stuff. This creates an objective set of standards across all your accounts. So you're able to then measure and see, oh, I keep pushing back this data. I keep missing this person. It helps kind of rationalize it for, I think, a lot of sellers, very high EQ and are emotional sellers a lot of the time. It helps kind of create a structure and a framework outside of just the usual Salesforce stages for a deal. And it's really helped me even using our own platform for this. Like, okay, yeah, that went well and it's sounding really good. And we'll kind of all test each other in pipeline review meetings during the week of like, hey, you said the same thing about this prospect 3 times. I know it was a great first call or second call and you love them and they're stoked about it, but like, they're probably not going to buy. And I think it's helpful to kind of bring that objectivity to your own deals and have that as a tool. But maybe let's take a second and get really tactical here. Jonathan jumped in and asked, how do you typically introduce a map to a prospective customer? And honestly, I think this is the biggest challenge that folks that don't take this approach today, they use it as setting expectations about what they want to do versus using it to get the mutual buy-in. And this is a really like fine line type thing that you really need to nail. Would love to hear maybe from the group, we can each do, a 45-second soundbite on how you would think about introducing this on that, first or second call. Keith, maybe I'll pass it off to you to get your take.
Yeah. So the majority of the deals that my team works are fairly lengthy sales cycles, 6 to 9 months on average. So, and our buyers aren't professional software buyers, right? They're staffing people. They run, and help people find work. So it's our goal to help them understand how they get from point A to point B. No one likes to be surprised in the process, right? They want to know upfront what they're getting into. So we leverage it at the very start as we in our qualification call to say, okay, this sounds like something we can certainly help with. Would it be helpful if I give you a quick, background on how this would look and how it's worked with other customers? And then we go through and say, this is typically the steps. But we also want to know the steps on your end because you've got a process, right? And we marry those together. And now we have a plan that we can both agree on and we're aligned and work together. So we bring it up right at the front.
Yeah. So you're avoiding, the kind of like surprise that might come with, oh, I didn't realize there was this step coming up, but you're also making sure, from your side, but also on their end, every customer is in some way a special snowflake, regardless of how much we try to streamline this. There could be a random stakeholder. Sometimes there's like, hey, the COO gets involved in this purchase decision. Cool. Like I would have never guessed that. But if I didn't ask the question, we would have gone through our normal sales process that worked for 90% of our deals. We would have missed that. And then now we're kind of playing catch up and missing that key persona. So that's a great, having that question. Hey, let me explain to you what it looks like on our side. There's no surprises, but also I know every company that I've ever worked with has some unique thing. What is that for you guys? And that's a great way of uncovering those potential blockers right from the very start.
One last thing I would add is that also our implementations for a full scale implementations, like 9 to 12 months, we typically have buyers that come in and are like, all right, we want to get live in 3 months. And that becomes an expectation to let them know why it takes the time that it takes. But that's another thing is, you get unrealistic expectations. You got to course correct.
That's a good point. You might get, again, kind of going back to like overly excited, great first conversations. Like if they're saying some of those things, honestly, it might be a red flag. And again, to like earlier sellers, you might just be super stoked. Wow, I just found this bluebird opportunity. Honestly, that could be just as bad as them not wanting to take the next call in some ways, when you think about the process. Manuel, how about yourself? What are some of the best practices that you coach your team on and your customers on when using mutual plans?
Yeah, I think giving value for prospects and making it easier for them, and in combination with radical candor. Just really going out and say like, hey, look, this is not for us to like do like revenue forecasting. This is really for the buyer to tell them like, look, here's what typically happens. You asked me to send you some information to this date after a decade. I don't know what some information is. And then you evaluate it internally if you got time, which is never, and then you ghost me, and then nothing ever happens. And this is good if you're not that interested in like working together. Like then we can also just end the call now, and I don't need to send you some information, which is totally fine. And we go solve problems.
You're giving them an out. Yeah.
An other alternative, like let's have a conversation about what needs to happen from today to you being successful after taking informed decision, if you're the right provider or not. And at any point in the steps, like we're going to outline, you can take that information. I'm just here to help you take an informed decision. Would you be okay like with walking me through like how that typically works like in your organization? And then like, okay, here step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's like, okay, here's what our typical process look like. So in your case, I think we can skip the reference call because you're just coming from the reference call. But what you mentioned, it would be tremendous to have like our board member speak to your board member on like the cash conversion cycle and the time ROI in a recession. That's good. And then not have like the mutual action plan from 0 to pilot and just start a POC, but like what needs to happen from 0 to full rollout, which might be like 17 steps. And like, okay, so the POC here, step number 5 is a validation mechanism to actually then understand if the full rollout makes sense for you, or if which is not a great fit. So the POC, or like, I hate POC from the bottom of my heart, but this just becomes a validation criteria. And then you can have a conversation like, can we in the map replace that POC with like a reference call, or like a money back guarantee, or like a case study, or a white paper, or a workshop, or whatever it is that is taking you like 50 minutes, like 5 hours, and not like 5 weeks, because I understand you want to roll out Bullhorn in 3 months, not 9 to 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're gonna do like a POC, like we're just gonna add 6 months to the cycle, which is fine, but you're not gonna be ready in spring 2023.
Yeah, so I kind of heard 2 big things there. One, are we having the same conversation? And like, I'm not going to be offended if we're not. And where are you at in your buyer journey? Instead of, hey, we're starting from our normal Salesforce stage here because this is when I took the call. Where are you at the process? It's like, hey, we've been looking at this for 3 months, we're ready to make a decision. Or is this like, hey, we're evaluating different ways to potentially do this thing, and all good if I'm going to send you a bunch of stuff and we can set a call for 3 months from now. That's not always the worst thing. And I think reps get kind of offended. It's like, oh, you're just kicking the can down. Sometimes that's actually what's happening. That's totally fine. So don't bother them and follow up. You're going to lower the chance of closing them in 3 months versus building your pipeline that way, which could be really effective. Or are we doing this now? And if so, like you said, contextualizing all of the things to their outcome and making sure it makes sense, right?
Aiming to that, which also makes me a bit, my closing statement is that I need to take over my son who catch fever last night. But Rafael perfectly equipped, who's the best guy at asking discovery questions, like being really rigorous on like mutual action planning from our company. Thanks so much.
Well, I hope your son's feeling better soon. We'll continue the conversation here for another few, but appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Awesome. And kind of switching over, Johnston, what's something that you think the reps on your team might not do a great job with in terms of introducing something like this that you wish maybe they do a better job at?
Wow, I think some of my reps are on the call too, so I should be careful.
We're not going to name names. Coaching opportunity.
No, it's really funny. I was having a conversation just this week. So I recently took over this team a few months ago, and maps aren't being widely used across the team, and I think they're generally a newer tool here at Affirm. But I think there's this kind of the art of the sale, the gut feeling of the sale, sort of that emotional side where it feels like you're introducing something that might, to the buyer, feel like additional work, right? Like you're adding something that's like almost making or putting more work on their plate. When, if done right and by design, the map should not be that, right? The map should be a tool that you run with, that you lead, and should they collaborate with you and be able to add stuff on there like they can in Accord, then fantastic. You know you've got an engaged buyer. So I see this hesitation, especially if we're later in a deal.
Yeah.
You know, a couple stages in, to want to introduce because they feel like it's been too late, right? And I think to the earlier point and to the question that we got in the chat, the best way to introduce is just offer it up. Hey, tons of my partners have found this tool to be super useful because this is work and they have a bunch of other priorities and they can't always stay organized around this. So I typically run this and then I'll keep it up to date. And every meeting at the very beginning, at the end, we'll just take a quick review, pulse check where we are and what's coming next. And who cares what you've done in the past or, you know, the fact that you haven't introduced this yet. So I think that's the biggest challenge now, just getting them a little bit more confident and comfortable with introducing it, right? Offering it up as a value add.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. And Adrian just actually perfectly timed because we're planning on doing this poll of like, what is the biggest reason you do not think people do this today? I think like objectively, it makes sense, right? You're getting a pulse check on the deal. Is it real or not? You're guiding a customer. You're helping uncover potential, blockers, both for your team as well as theirs. Like, great. Why is this not something that just every single team and every new rep uses? That's a big question. I think a lot of it comes down to the confidence side and the rep feeling like it's more work for the buyer. And really, at the end of the day, what's under that, I think it's afraid of the no. I think people at the end of the day are afraid of doing this early. And that's why the best reps work the fewest deals, is because they get the no's early and they're confident enough in that there are buyers out there that are excited about their product and that are actually going to buy. And they don't spend their time trying to convince or push deals along so they feel like they're being productive. That's my assumption behind it, and why I don't think more people do this. And I see the best reps do this, if not through a tool verbally, because they're not afraid of that, because they have that confidence.
Ross, a no is so good. It took a long time, but man, it is so good to get to a no, because then your calendar opens up, right? Like you are no longer chasing or wasting time or, driving with hope in that particular deal.
Totally. Yeah. Keith, what about you on your team? When you look at, again, maybe let's zoom out, not exactly like using maps and something like a chord, but like, where do you think this hesitation comes from, and why this isn't as common as, the best practice, even some of the best practice I'm thinking about, maybe some people don't do, like getting on a call to walk through a proposal. I still see people throw that over the fence, but like, why isn't this kind of like the 101 training for every new AE that gets promoted from being an SDR?
I think you nailed it with your last comment on it. The biggest challenge I see though is because we train our reps to use mutual action plans. And I'm sure everybody on this call has seen this. A rep will start to introduce it, then they'll get in the thick of it, and then they never bring it up again, right? And then the deal pushes, and then they feel like it's too late to reintroduce it. And at that point, you've lost control, right? And it's hard to get things back on track, and they feel awkward trying to bring it back in. It's like, well, it's been like 3 months. Why are you bringing this back in now? That's the biggest challenge, is the consistency. And I think Johnson brought up a really good point of set the expectation up front that you're going to review it at the beginning of every call just to pulse check. It's not something that you got to spend a lot of time on. It's like, this is what we talked about last time. What's changed? Because let's update it now. Here's what we're doing next. Boom, move on to the next. And then it becomes that consistent process. So reps don't feel awkward because you don't bring it up, and then you've lost control of the sale.
Keith, it feels like it's one of those, I'm scared to be a human and make a mistake. So I don't want to like reintroduce this because I forgot to introduce this, the last 2 calls. And I think there's so like, when you're genuinely, human in your deals and you're like, hey, it's totally my fault. I didn't bring this up the last 2 calls, but we put this into place. And I think we both agree that it's important. Let's get this back in here. Let's pulse check real quick and go back and even review everything that you've done thus far to ensure that you are at the same stage, because deals are so fluid. They're so fluid and anything can change at any point in time. So yeah, I was talking about pulse checks with a rep yesterday, actually, about a similar situation.
Yeah, I think it's the lack of confidence and afraid of making a mistake. Raphael, what about
It's my internet that is missing, or
Oh, sorry, my internet just
okay,
jumped
yeah.
for a second. I think I'm back. But what about you? Yeah, so it's something that you found really useful lately, but
Yeah.
and you've been doing sales for a little bit. What, why maybe in
Yeah.
the past is it something that you just didn't know about, or yeah,
Like
curious.
I think before, when I was selling like a much more complex software in the military, like we always did this project plan, as Johnston said. So the customer was not really involved, and it was like, okay, we need to do this to get the customer. And that for me, like the big difference when you do mutual action plan is that you much better understand what does the guy need. Like I remember once I was talking to a prospect and he said, okay, so usually the software developer will test the SDK. Then like it will be sold to the other 5 members internally. Then usually the provider visit us in our office in Switzerland. Then usually you need to win the CTO. Then usually if it's over 100K, the CFO also need to co-sign. So I think when you do the mutual action plan together with the prospects, it's the only way you can discover all of this. Because if not, you will just, okay, the developer will have tested the software, then you will get an email, okay, maybe now you should come to Switzerland, visit me. So it's much better if you know in the beginning that this is the 10 steps, because then if you are in step 8 and you say to your champion, hey, now we are in step 8, what's really missing now? Will we make it or not? Like at some point, it's
Totally.
We need to disqualify and get the nose as Johnston said also.
Exactly. And it's interesting actually to see the poll results, almost an even split in terms of pushing buyers too hard and not wanting to add more work. And again, this is something, it's funny, even building a chord, I get questions, even from, the market is like, hey, doesn't this, how do the buyers react? And I'm like, you have no idea how appreciative the other side is. Like, you haven't been a buyer, have you? Like, this is my first time being in my role now that I'm a purchaser. You don't have time to think about the basics of any deal. You don't realize how much else is going on. You're not getting paid. Like sellers are getting literally paid usually half of their OTE on selling the thing. If anything, it's more work for you in social capital to go out and buy something. It's the opposite. So you really are providing so much more value from having those pulse checks, from creating this structure, from following up, asking these questions, and not just pitching the ROI and the features and functionality. And I think it's this really reframing of what sales is, to helping the buyer buy versus selling a thing. And that's kind of why it's interesting still to see, people being afraid that you're gonna, that you're pushing them, asking them to do homework, all this stuff, when it's the opposite. You're doing their homework for them if they're gonna buy. And that's that mindset shift of, you need to assume every conversation the person is in the mindset to potentially be a customer either now or later. And that's going to change the way that you spend your time and approach calls, because you're not going to be worried about offending someone. If you're on a call with someone and they're never going to buy the thing, it's fine if you're asking them to do these things, because it's required to get the purchase done. So super, super interesting to kind of see that mental model that I think we really need to shift as sales leaders to our teams to get them to do the right stuff, and reframe that. So we're going to wrap up in the next few minutes here. Maybe if everyone wants to share a takeaway from something that someone else on the panel had shared, and feel free if you're one of the 40 or so folks in the participants, what you kind of took away as something you can apply to deals moving forward. Keith, I'll let you kick off with something maybe you can take back to your team from today.
Yeah, I think the reframing that Johnston put around pulse checks, we probably said it internally here a different way, but I think that makes it a really easy way to help reps being consistent. I think another thing just to call out is that reps from my level, maps really help with forecasting, because as we know, reps will forecast a deal based on where they are in the process. Well, I just did a demo, so I know I've got a contract, an SOW, red lines. Yeah, we're going to close it this quarter. Does the customer know that they're buying this quarter? We've all seen it, right? So the mutual action plan lets me know that they know what is needed to be done on the customer side in order to get to, as Johnson's, launch, right? Not the signature, but to the ultimate go live. Do we know what's going on? So from my level, it's not just reps. It's very helpful all the way up from Johnson to the VP level to help forecast deals as well.
Totally. Yeah, the reframing for the team, I think, is super helpful, because if they don't get the why behind it, it's going to feel like another thing. It's going to feel like filling out your Salesforce stages versus something that's going to help you really unlock the next level of selling with your customers. And yeah, Johnston, what about yourself? What's something you'll take back to your team today?
I find that today is a good reminder that this is another tool that you're asking reps to use, right? There's value in it. I don't think anyone disagree with that, right? But it's another tool outside of Salesforce, outside of everything else. And that wasn't a part of the poll, but I bet that's probably another reason why people are hesitant to do this, right? To Keith's point earlier, like, people don't keep up with it because you got a Google Doc or another thing that you gotta add notes to. So I think from my perspective, being a manager, coaching on a customized individual basis and understanding my team's style, both with how and when they feel comfortable introducing this, doubling down on that, right? Say like, look, I'm not going to tell you exactly when to introduce this. I'm going to play devil's advocate if you don't, or I find like it's not actually working. But let's figure out the best time for you. Like, how do you want to run this cycle? When do you feel like it's comfortable? And leave that open to them and try to empower them with different ways and approaches, whether it's actual verbiage or, tactical ways to introduce it. But it's also, as a manager, making sure that they're keeping up with it, right? And making it as easy as possible, whether it's a new tool like Accord or something that we can change in Salesforce or something that just makes it second nature for them, because it is, the rep needs to stay on top of it. And if they don't, then it's just going to fail, like, altogether. There's no point in doing it.
Yeah, the art and science of sales. Some people approach deals in a certain way, and it needs to be flexible for them. But at the end of the day, you need to make sure that they're guiding and controlling the deal versus letting customers do that, for sure. And Raphael, how about yourself?
Yeah, for me, like, I'm turning into a big fan of using Accord and mutual action plan in general. Like, for us, our sales cycle is quite short because, like, we sell support to founders. So usually we talk to founders and then it's like a quick win. But for them, it's also quite impressive to see, okay, there are these tools out there. There are people using this mutual action plans that I never heard about because they are also buyers. And this is quite interesting. How many founders of early stage startup have never heard about this? And when I hear now also sales leaders saying, okay, a couple of reps are also not doing it the real way, I think there's a really big opportunity out there for the reps that will use it to make some money and sell some software.
Totally. At the end of the day, that's definitely the driving force. Yeah, awesome, guys. Well, appreciate everyone taking the time, especially the panelists. I'm sure you got just a couple things to get to before you wrap up the week and start heading into the challenges of holiday season on top of everything that's going on. So appreciate the time, and this is helpful for me to also think about on our side. It's like, how is this different? How do we help change and reframe this to help sellers be more successful and buyers as well? So appreciate that, and hope everyone has a good rest of the week.
Bye.
Thanks, Ross.
All right, take it easy, everyone.
Thanks, Ross.